Audrey. So Nikos said, can I please come and talk about the works that we did while I was on the project. I was involved from 2010 to 2012 primarily in a curatorial capacity. And I remember very clearly going to the interview with Scott and Nikos and saying to them, you realise I'm an art historian, right? You know, I don't work in media and communication, I don't work in public space policy, I don't work in geomedia architecture, I don't work in techno-locative mapping. I'm really interested in the history of art and aesthetics. And one of the most fascinating things about this collaboration, because it was an intensely collaborative venture that we necessarily, I think, had to undertake in order to make this happen, was the way in which the different disciplines had to preserve their own specificity while reaching a consensus, a platform by which we could all speak to each other meaningfully and hopefully also speak to the public. So when I present these works, I'm not saying them just from my research. This is really very much not my research. This is our research, and Ross Gibson, who is with us, was co-curator on this project, on these two projects I want to talk about with me, as well as Celia Chmlowski, as well as Somi Han from Nabi Art Centre, as well as Soyoung Ro. So there was this actual infrastructure, if you like, of curatorial logistics that we needed to negotiate in order to make these works happen. So the other thing that I really liked, other than this cross-disciplinary collaborative element of the project, was this idea that art was already embedded in social and political fabrics, and in fact has always been embedded in social and political fabrics, that art is not produced in institutions outside of the world in which we live, but is in fact very much part of our experience of everyday life, of aesthetics, of interaction, of the city. So that made sense to me as a curator, but in a way that I had never really come to it before. When they said to me, so we're going to do the work, it's going to be an experiment, it might fail. It's not the kind of curatorial premise that one might normally adopt when you're presenting to the public this possibility that we were necessarily going to work in a laboratory-like setting where we did not necessarily know the outcome of what it was that we were doing, and it may not be successful in the way that the public thinks it's successful. They were okay with this. Sorry, any stakeholders in the room for that. So we had two projects in the making that I wanted to talk about. They were also in resistance to, I think, the kind of keywords that some of the other speakers, you were talking about this idea of, fashion, ocular, stylish, bright, passive, spectacular, corporate wallpaper kind of, which is also a little bit like the skin of light. And if you are putting in a role of curating a large screen project for public space, one of the most common forms by that might take is this large, passive, glittering, spectacular, thing that would occupy a commercial realm, as in the corporate wallpaper model. But what we definitely did not want to do was that. We had this idea that we wanted to use the public screens, in fact, in opposition to the way that they might have been used already, to think about principles of humanisation. So this idea that the space is only, or the screen is only public when it involves a human element. This becomes extremely obvious when you're working with private institutions, like Danny was saying as well, with private money, where the screen itself is private, it's a private space. Our experience of that public space is always vectored through this corporate platform by which it is projected into our reality. So, the two projects. On October the 7th, 2011, this was our, sorry, I'll get to the, on October the 7th, 2011, we were in Seoul, I was in Seoul with Audrey, yes, to present this work called Hello, a live telematic dance project that linked two large screens in Seoul and in Melbourne. The project was choreographed by Australian choreographer Rebecca Hilton, so we're working with choreographers as well, artists who are working as choreographers, and the Korean choreographer Sun Ho Park, two artists who had never met each other than through Skype, two curatorial teams who had never communicated other than through Skype, which was very interesting. So Rebecca came up with this proposal to do what she called a vernacular folk dance, or a continuously evolving dance routine in which sequences of movements on one side of the world were translated through the large screen to a community on the other side of the world who would then be responsible for teaching and learning the dance, as in this sort of translational dance game. We were thinking about that in relation to transnationality, sort of transversal, transactional, possibly, hopefully, transgressive aspects of contemporary behaviour and imagination that hinged on mobility as a kind of cultural process. But we were also wanting to think about it as a case study, to test how, not what large screens were currently good for, but what else they could do, what other functions they might have, what other potential aesthetic, political, mobile experiences they might generate. What are they not doing, in other words? And this element of the human, of the connection, of the gestural, of this anti-alienation aspect of technology was something that we were really interesting. So one of the goals of the project was to go beyond this idea of just providing information between person to person, to allow spaces for that information to warp and change, to embed that kind of aesthetics of the mistake or the error or the shift in perspective within the structure of the logic. And so curatorially, this demanded also a shift in a working method. Etymologically, the word curator is from the curare, which means to fix or to cure, as well as to preserve. So this idea of curing, fixing, preserving, working with institutions perhaps. I mean, we only have this word from the mid-1600s in its artistic sense because we had disciplinary institutions, also like lunatic asylums, for example, where the people needed to be taken care of, as well as the objects in the buildings that needed to be taken care of. But what we were trying to do here, we were working with events. So we weren't working with anything that needed to be fixed, cured, preserved in time, but with something that was flexible, changing, alterable, and unpredictable, I guess. I mean, totally in the logic of the avant-garde that you were describing before, Danny. I think that we definitely hadn't given up on this possibility of improvisational structures to affect change, like art as an agent of social change. So the first thing that we had to do was to find a space and a screen. And you'd think that in Seoul, it would be, I'll go back to this. You'd think that in Seoul it would be very easy to do this. Like all we needed was a screen, right? There are thousands of them, like literally thousands of them. But they are all, as Scott was mentioning before, on the tops of buildings, or as Luye was mentioning before, really inaccessible, owned by corporations, and not kind of facilitating the human interaction that we were trying to seek out, particularly if you're involving dance. So one of the sites I went to visit before we settled on making a screen, because there wasn't one that we needed to, of the scale and the size that we needed, which is a fairly significant thing to do, was this one. We thought possibly we could use this one. It's the Hamlet Media Wall in the centre of Seoul, which would have been great for that person-to-person interaction. It's right on the ground, if we were trying to find an equivalent. But it was in a zone which had very intense noise restrictions, so we couldn't have played music, and we couldn't have done anything after 6 p.m. So there's all these kind of social, regulatory, logistical elements to the project that came up. So we ended up settling on Arco Art Centre in Seoul, which didn't have a screen, which is in the theatre district. And we decided that actually, rather than that McLuhan quote that you were opening with about this idea that I can't remember exactly. I wrote it down. I'm going to quote it because I want to get it right. That the extension is the crux of creating change and not the content. I think we were very interested in the content, but this extension was the physical space. So the curating of the event meant the curating of publics, and it meant the curating of spaces. We had to choose the spaces that would enable the event to occur. So that meant choosing spaces that had high social traffic, high foot traffic, that were not in the, far out in the middle of nowhere, but already had a crowd. So we didn't have to bring all of the elements. So in a way, they are site-specific projects that pay attention to the architecture of the city in which they're embedded, and that architecture becomes part of the work, rather than just implanting work into a context and making it speak on its own terms. The second thing we needed to do was to create the public. So we had two very different kinds of public. We were working with Fed Square in Melbourne, publics there, you know, this mix of tourists, ambient foot traffic, people who go to watch the screen, and their broadcasting ranges from commercial to artistic projects to local content to live broadcasts of football games to, you know, the FedCam, which was something that we were thinking about, where you can see yourself on the screen at the same time as you walk through the square, so it's like a big digital mirror. Very different sets of people and their social realities, using the screen as like a portal, a bridge, where you can see each other through that space. And we realised instantly, I think, that there was no possibility ever that we were going to get an exact equivalence because of these very geo-specific elements of the project. So scale was important. The screen needed to be big enough to reach a crowd. It needed to be integrated into a space that would enable physical movement. And it needed to be able to take place in a way that would allow people to dance. So we came up with this solution to create little tents that people could go inside in order to learn the dance move from one side of the world and pass it on to the next, in a way to kind of protect them, which was not an element of the project that we had originally considered. And formally and aesthetically, it was going to be evolving like the Kadapixby, the exquisite corpse game of the surrealists, where you have one element that is fed through another element in order to create this whole collaborative structure. So aesthetically, it resembled, I guess, the kind of politics that Nikos and Scott and Audrey were really invested in the project as a whole. But I have a clip which will make this really clear and easy, which our Korean counterparts made for us. It's like 3 minutes. Just mouse and sound.
야외에서 춤추는 거에 대해서 굉장히 부끄러워한다는 것 때문에 텐트라는 아이디어가 나왔거든요. 이제 텐트 안에서 뭔가 내가 동작을 배우고 그리고 그 동작을 호주 사람에게 가르치고 뭐 이런 릴레이 게임 형식이 저는 굉장히 재밌다고 생각을 하고요. 동작을 전달하면서 저는 동작에 서로가 조금씩 변화가 되어서 가거든요. 영상물로 나중에 다 같이 보는데요. 그런 동작이 변화되어져 가는 그런 모습들이
갑자기 하실 분이 턴을 하시는데 어떻게 해야 되지? 뭐가 보이는데도 되게 좀 이렇게 소통하는 느낌이 들고
되게 적극적이라서 당황스러워서
멀리 있음에도 불구하고 이렇게 바로바로 가르쳐줄 수 있다는 게 참 되게 많이 세상이 가까워졌다는 것
그냥 옆집 친구 이런 것처럼 되게 막 거리낌 같은 게 하나도 안 느껴지고 재밌었어요. 언어를 할 때는 뭔가 좀 어렵고 부담이 되는데 공부를 할 때 너무 즐겁게 같이 대화할 수 있는 게 공감되는 활동되고 재밌었어요. 안에 어떤 사람이 있었어요? 남자 사람, 다른 사람.
오늘 이 시간을 통해서 사람들이 호주 사람들과 자유롭게 즐겁게 네트워크를 했다는 사실과 그리고 거기에는 움직임이라는 코드가 있었다는 거, 그 움직임이 뭐 정확하게 전달되느냐 안 되느냐 뭐 이런 거는 별로 중요하지 않았던 것 같아요. 왜냐하면 중간중간에 보면 움직임을 새롭게 막 만들어내는 사람들도 굉장히 많았었고요. 그리고 또 그거에 대해서 경험하는 거에 대해서 굉장히 즐거워하시더라고요. 저는 그런 부분만 해도 충분히 만족한다고 생각해요.
They were very good at making these little clips for us afterwards. So that was the first of the two pieces that we made, which used body and dance, and this idea of human language or physical language as a possible platform for communicating with people in different cultural arenas. And the second project that we did was called Dance Battle, which we did in 2012. Translation is not only conventionally understood as this movement of meaning from one site to another, but also the creation and production of meaning. So we were thinking about translational processes between both of these works as something that produce content as well as, enable it. So the dance battle was highly sensory. In the Rebecca Hilton and Sun Park enabled the work, so if people forgot moves, then it didn't really matter, it would just pass from one person to the next. But for this one, we worked with 3 different screens. I mean, I could also talk about the amazing technical logistics of trying to just get this to happen. It's 3 cities, 3 large screens, Perth, Melbourne, Seoul. We decided that we didn't want to use Skype because the quality, real-time quality, wasn't actually up to the capacity for you to see and respond to someone in real time through Skype, so we did it all through broadband, different speeds of broadband in different places, 3 tech teams who'd never met each other. I mean, this was the first time that anyone had done a networked dance battle in 3 cities in the world. So it was kind of Scott and Nikos going, off you go, find the hip hop dancers, make it happen. So I was again sold for this event. I don't want to actually theorise this too much, but I just thought I'd just lay it out as something that we might want to talk about as an example of a project that might use a large screen in a different way. We had split screen technology, so 3 different sites could be visible on one screen. We had mixers at each site, and it was very important to us that the music that was played with the dancers at each site was transmissible, so you could hear what the Korean hip-hop dancers were dancing to as they were dancing in Melbourne and in Perth as audience members, and then you'd switch. So there was this, I think the whole thing went for an hour or around that. Is that about right? About an hour.
2 or 3.
2 or 3. And I just this is the screen that we built for this project. So we learnt again from the Arco one where we put the screen on the facade of the building. We actually realised that we were going to have it at ground level because, it's a portal, right? You're standing on one side, you want to talk to someone else, so why not put the screen down here? It's still a public screen. But in order to arrange that, you can't film the screen at the same time because of the feedback with the camera loop. If you're filming the filming, then you get the infinite regress of all of the images that are transmitted. So they made these preparation screens. So this is at Arco Art Centre in Seoul. I don't think I have. I'm not sure. I don't think I have anyone's Perth. And there's our excellent technical diagram, which is I'm not even going to start, which I don't know anything about. And at the end, we had this collaborative teaching of Gangnam style, why not? It's a public event. It was very popular at this particular moment. The artists in this project were the dancers. So it was unlike the first work where we had worked with Sun Park and Rebecca Hilton, who had come up with this structure, this eventual structure. We made the curatorial platform based on an existing generic vernacular, which is the dance battle. It already exists. We didn't invent this format. And we populated it with local artists, local hip-hop artists from each site. And I know I'm probably out of time, but I have one little thing that might be sort of bring those 2 things together. It's about dialogue. Participatory aspects of interaction in both of these works become just as important as aesthetic considerations such as colour, scale, amplitude, architecture. The aesthetics that are taking place in projects like Hello and Dance Battle, they are kind of inter-semiotic translations. I guess we could think about them as kinetics, always kind of moving. participants were entering these chains of non-verbal kinds of participation, so dance, bodily, inhabited. The kind of art that is produced in this platform is akin to what Liam Gillick has called the discursive mode of contemporary production, so discursive dialogue. And this nice link between curere, which was the Latin for discourse, which literally means running backwards and forth, and curare, which is curating, which is, I'm saying, not about fixing or curing in place, but in fact, enabling change, agents of change. The discursive, Gillick writes, emerges from collaborative, collective and negotiated positions. It's a mode of generating ideas and placing them in dialogue with other ideas, rather than producing forms of pure expression or supersubjectivity, he says. So the place of the curator in this matrix is a bit like a diplomat. You become someone who negotiates different entities, desires, spaces, expectations, publics. And like the logic of the event, the curatorial focus was very much evental, involved in the production and management of a temporal, real-time, and it's very important to us that it was a real-time moment that enabled you to inhabit that screen space. So I was thinking about this in relationship to the idea of dance and discourse. What is the relationship between dance and discourse? Going back and forth, conversational forms, dialogism. To enter into discourse on a non-verbal level breaks with its connotations of rationality, of that reason, reappraising its attachment, its traditional attachment to systems of speech and writing. If we follow this line of thinking and subscribe to the idea that all forms of communication are essentially evental, that occur in time, in event-based processes, then our understanding of the communicative text is easily expanded beyond the linguistic towards the multisensory, which is something we've all talked about already, like haptic elements, how to get away from that large screen stuck on top of a building that is just a passive window into someone's corporate advertising structure. Perhaps it is principles of interference rather than correspondence that we are after. As Tino Segal has noted, it may well be that dance, as well as singing, might be the paradigm for another mode of production, one that stresses transformations of acts instead of transformations of material, transformations of acts instead of transformations of materials. The artist now appears in the guise of a choreographer, setting in motion gestural trails of interaction that speak not to ordered or bounded or singular subject, but to translated complexities that are necessarily plural and that are necessarily public. That's all I really had to say. Thanks.
Thanks, Amelia. We've got 10 minutes for questions. Sorry?